And I don't have an answer, but I do have 2 films to recommend to you. And I'm gonna, rather than show clips from these films, I'm actually gonna describe them as best I can, as my own gesture toward the ecology of images and my own vain protest against their great power. There are 2 documentaries that were released in theaters last year. Although documentary is a very elastic term. One of them, the less well-known of the 2, is called Dawson City Frozen Time. I don't know have any of you seen that? Yes, all right. It's a documentary by Bill Morrison, who previously made a film called Decasia, which is put together out of found scraps of decayed old nitrate and other kinds of film stock. And that movie is an uncannily beautiful movie because he uses the degradation of the image and what has happened physically to the film to create these very haunting and ghostly effects. So you'll see kind of people and faces, but sometimes the emulsion has been scratched off or has melted, and it's a very kind of almost abstract and poetic but curiously moving film. So Dawson City is a few things at once, but it tells a story, a remarkable story about a town in the Canadian Yukon called Dawson City, which was a gold rush boom town in the 1890s. And like many such towns, it was built up overnight and had, among other things, a big movie palace. And the movie palace was the end of the line for the distribution of films in those days. And there was no thought in the silent era, in the first decades of the 20th century, about preserving movies, that these were things that anyone would ever want to see again. And so when the films got to the end of the line, when the cans they just stayed there. And they piled up, and eventually the gold rush boom was over, and the movie palace was torn down, and tens of thousands of reels of film were buried in a pit underneath a hockey rink. It was Canada, so. And then, decades later, when the hockey rink was torn down and people were kind of digging up the foundation, they saw these little bits of celluloid sticking out of the ground, and there was a treasure trove of films, many of which had been completely forgotten, completely lost. And what this film does is tells this story, which is a fascinating story of retrieval, of kind of archaeology, but also does it largely by interpolating snatches of these films. So you see these ghostly images, and some of these things, some of these movies were buried underground for 80 years, so they're not in beautiful, pristine digital shape by any means, but that's part of the power. So you really do feel like you're watching ghosts, like you're seeing something kind of being taken out of the past and brought into the present in a way that is haunting and fascinating and makes you think about how much more of the visual record might be lost. How many more of these human faces and bodies and forms that you see on this film might have just faded away altogether. So it's a very bittersweet and fascinating film. Dawson City, Frozen Time.